His name was Edward Cain, and no one ever said it without fear. In the corporate world, he was untouchable, ruthless in negotiation, cold in boardrooms, allergic to small talk. They called him the Iron Wall. Assistants quit within days. CEOs prepared months for meetings that lasted minutes. He built his empire on silence, strategy, and never, ever getting emotionally involved. No family photos, no charity galas, no trace of a heart. He walked the halls of his skyscraper like a ghost in a $1,000 suit, and people scattered when they heard his footsteps. Then, one afternoon in the marble lobby of Cain International, a child broke the silence. She was maybe 6 years old, small and curious, sitting alone on the bench near the security desk. No one paid attention to her. Until Edward Cain stepped out of the elevator, briefcase in hand, and passed in front of her. She looked up at him, tilted her head, and asked, "Why are you so sad?" And in that instant, time stopped. Edward froze mid-step, not because of the question, but because no one had spoken to him like that in years, decades maybe. He turned slowly. The lobby was dead silent. His security team stood frozen behind glass, unsure whether to intervene. The girl looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. She wasn't being rude. She was just honest. "I'm not sad," he said flatly. She tilted her head again. "You look like you miss someone." Before he could respond, a frantic woman rushed over. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Cain. She just wandered off. I didn't realize." Edward raised a hand. "It's fine." He looked back at the girl. "What's your name?" "Ava," she said, then smiled. "You look like a Mr. Edward." He didn't smile back, but something in his face shifted, barely. "Nice to meet you, Ava," he said, and walked away. But as he stepped into the waiting car, the question echoed in his mind. "Why are you so sad?" And worse, he had no answer. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, the highest in the city, but felt lower than he had in years. She was just a child, a stranger, but she had seen something no adult dared mention. Sadness. He tried to brush it off. But by morning, something strange had happened. He asked his assistant, in a tone so unfamiliar she thought she misheard, to find the little girl from the lobby. "No record," she said hours later. "No name logged. Cameras were down for maintenance." "Sorry, sir." He dismissed her with a nod. But he couldn't stop thinking about her, and that question. The next morning he walked into the lobby himself, waited, sat on the same bench. For the first time in over 15 years, he didn't go to his office. 2 days passed. Then on the third, Ava appeared again, this time holding a crayon drawing. She saw him and ran over. "You came back." He blinked, unsure what to say. No one had ever said those words to him with joy before. "I drew you," she said, handing over the paper. It was messy, full of color. A tall man in a black suit beside a little girl in a yellow dress. "You made me smile in the picture," she said proudly. Edward stared at it. No one, not in 2 decades, had drawn him. He folded it gently and placed it in his coat pocket. "Why are you always alone?" Ava asked suddenly. He hesitated. "It's easier," he replied. Ava frowned. "Easier doesn't mean better." And again she was right. They began meeting by accident, or so it seemed. Each morning, Edward would find a reason to visit the lobby. Each time Ava would appear with a new question, a drawing, or a small story. "I saw a cloud shaped like a heart." "Do you know how to whistle?" "Have you ever been to the zoo?" He started answering, slowly, stiffly. Then, one morning, he asked her a question. "What's your favorite thing in the whole world?" She didn't hesitate. "My mom's laugh. But I don't hear it much anymore." Edward paused. "Why not?" Ava looked down. "She cries a lot now. She thinks I don't see her, but I do." The sentence hit him harder than anything she'd asked before. He looked around. No driver. No security. Just a girl with too much weight in her words. He made a decision he couldn't explain. "Would you like to see the top floor?" he asked. Her eyes lit up. No child had ever been allowed on the executive floor of Cain International. But that morning, the elevator chimed open with Ava inside, holding Edward's hand. She looked around in awe. "Whoa, it's so clean." He almost smiled. He showed her his office, the view, the giant table no one ever sat at. "Do you draw in here?" she asked. "No," he said. "I sign things." She looked unimpressed. "That's boring." He chuckled, a sound so foreign he startled himself. Ava pointed to a dusty whiteboard in the corner. "Can I draw?" He nodded, and for the next 30 minutes, she turned the coldest room in the building into a rainbow-colored landscape of stick figures and shooting stars. When she left, he stood in front of the whiteboard for a long time. It was the first time the office had felt alive. That evening, Edward did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He walked to his late sister's storage unit. She had died young, a sudden illness that took her within weeks. They were close once, before the business, before the empire. She had a daughter, Ava, a name he hadn't heard until now. He fumbled through old boxes, hands shaking, until he found a photo album. Inside, a toddler in a yellow dress, laughing in the sun. His niece, his only living family. He sat on the concrete floor, the pages trembling in his lap, realization crashing over him like a wave. The little girl in the lobby wasn't just a stranger. She was his blood. He didn't sleep that night, didn't eat, just sat at his desk, looking out at the city that had made him a king and left him hollow. The next morning, he asked his team to find Ava's mother. They were reluctant, surprised, but obeyed. By noon, he had a name, Elena Myers, his niece's mother, once married, now alone. Working 2 jobs, no listed emergency contacts. He stared at her file for a long time, and then he did something no one expected. He showed up at her door. Elena opened the door and froze. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They just looked at each other, 2 people with a shared silence too old to hold. Finally, Edward said, "I didn't know about her, about you." Elena's eyes welled. "You never asked," she whispered. He nodded. "I was gone." She stepped aside. Ava was coloring at the kitchen table. When she saw him, she grinned. "You found us." Elena blinked, confused. "She knows me," he said quietly. "She's known you since the day she could talk," Elena replied. "She just didn't know your name." They talked for hours, about Rachel, about Ava, about what was broken. Edward didn't apologize with words. He did it by listening, by asking, by staying. He offered nothing, no money, no solutions, just presence. And that, for the first time, was enough. When he left that night, Elena said something that stopped him at the door. She always asked why the man in her drawings looked so sad. He looked back. "So did I," he said. Edward returned to his office the next day, but everything felt different. The boardroom felt too big, the glass walls too cold, the silence too loud. He stood in front of the whiteboard Ava had drawn on. The stars, the smiling stick figures, they were still there. He picked up a marker and wrote 3 words beneath her rainbow. "Thank you, Ava." No one saw him do it, but by lunchtime, word had spread. The feared Mr. Cain was smiling. He began asking people their names, remembering birthdays, sitting through entire meetings without cutting anyone off, and once a week he left at noon, without explanation. The rumors swirled. No one knew where he went, but every Friday, Ava knew. They had lunch in the park every week, sometimes with sandwiches, sometimes with silence, but always together. Ava brought new drawings. Edward brought stories about the stars or how buildings were made or why the sky looked different at sunset. She didn't always understand, but she always listened. One afternoon she said, "Mommy laughs more now." He looked at her. "Maybe she forgot how." Ava nodded. "But you helped her remember." That day he cried, quietly, behind his sunglasses. while she built a tower out of twigs beside him. Months passed. Cain International began changing too, not with press releases or rebrands, but with kindness. A scholarship was launched, anonymously, for children of single mothers. A hospital received a donation under the name A. Myers. And once, when Ava had a school art show, the stern man in the front row clapped harder than anyone else. Even though he wore a suit and clearly didn't know how to blend in, he didn't need to. He wasn't hiding anymore. One evening, as the city lights flickered on, Edward sat in his office watching a photo Ava had taken of them. She had framed it and placed it on his desk. "I like this one," she had said. "You don't look sad." He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. The door knocked. It was his assistant, nervous, holding a stack of folders. "Sir, do you want me to file these?" He looked up, then down at the photo again. "No," he said with a faint smile. "File can wait." On her 7th birthday, Ava invited Edward to her party. He arrived late. He didn't know what to bring. He wore a suit, of course, the only thing he owned. When he walked into the backyard, the children stared, and then Ava ran to him, hugged him tightly, and said loudly, "This is my friend Edward. He used to be sad. Now he's not anymore." Everyone clapped. He didn't know what to do with his hands. But for the first time in years, he laughed, not politely, not awkwardly, but freely. And it echoed louder than the empire he had spent a lifetime building. Later that night, after the candles and the cake, Elena walked him to his car. "You're different," she said softly. "I'm trying," he answered. She nodded. "You're succeeding." He opened the car door, then paused. "I thought I was building something that would protect me." "And did it?" He looked up at the sky. "It kept people out, but it also kept me in." She smiled. "Well," she said, "you have the key now." He drove away slowly, the stars reflected in his windshield. Back in his penthouse, the city stretched endlessly beneath him. But instead of charts and contracts, his desk held drawings, crayon sketches, paper crowns. A note from Ava that said, "Thank you for not being scared of questions anymore." He pinned it on the wall. He didn't need mirrors anymore. He had her eyes, and that was enough. And every time he passed the lobby now, people didn't look away. Some even smiled. And sometimes, he smiled back. Months later, a reporter tried to write a piece on Edward Cain's transformation. They reached out to former employees, business partners, analysts. Most said the same thing. "He's softer now. He listens. He remembers your name." It's like someone lit a light inside him. But no one could explain what caused the change. Only Ava could. When she was asked years later about the man in the photo on her desk, the man in the suit with tired eyes and a proud smile, she simply said, "He let me ask questions." And then, he started asking them too. Edward Cain was once feared because he kept the world at arm's length. But it took a little girl, and one impossible question, to remind him that silence isn't strength, and walls don't heal what you refuse to face. He didn't become a better man overnight. He became one question at a time. And now, every Friday afternoon, a little girl runs to meet him on a bench in the park, and he listens, because sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is kneel down to a child and answer honestly. If this story touched you, comment. Sometimes the smallest voice asks the biggest question. Share this story with someone who still believes people can change, even the ones we fear most.